sorcerer," was the grim comment of Corbeck, who was standing by. Margaret answered him like a flash: "Ah! She was then near her tomb from which for thousands of years her body had not been moved. She must know that things are different now." "How must she know?" asked Corbeck keenly. "If she has that astral body that Father spoke of, surely she must know. How can she fail to, with an invisible presence and an intellect that can roam abroad even to the stars and the worlds beyond us?" She paused, and her father said solemnly: "It is on that supposition that we are proceeding. We must have the courage of our convictions, and act on them to the last." Margaret took his hand and held it in a dreamy kind of way, as we filed out of the house. She was holding it still when he locked the hall door, and when we moved up the road to the gateway, whence we took a cab to Paddington. When all the goods were loaded at the station, the whole of the workmen went on to the train. This took also some of the stone wagons used for carrying the cases with the great sarcophagi. Ordinary carts and plenty of horses were to be found at Waterton, which was our station for Kyllion. Mr. Trelawny had ordered a sleeping carriage for our party. As soon as the train had started, we all turned into our cubicles. That night I slept sound. There was over me a conviction of security which was absolute and supreme. Margaret's definite announcement, "There will not be any trouble tonight," seemed to carry assurance with it. I did not question it, nor did anyone else. It was only afterwards that I began to think as to how she was so sure. The train was a slow one, stopping many times and for considerable intervals. As Mr. Trelawny did not wish to arrive at Westerton before dark, there was no need to hurry, and arrangements had been made to feed the workmen at certain places on the journey. We had our own hamper with us in the private car. All that afternoon we talked over the Great Experiment, which seemed to have become a definite entity in our thoughts. Mr. Trelawny became more and more enthusiastic as the time wore on; hope was with him becoming certainty. Dr. Winchester seemed to become imbued with some of his spirit, though at times he would throw out some scientific fact which would either make an impasse to the other's line of argument, or would come as an arresting shock. Mr. Corbeck, on the other hand, seemed slightly antagonistic to the theory. It may have been that whilst the opinions of the others advanced, his own stood still; but the effect was an attitude which appeared negative, if not wholly one of negation. As for Margaret, she seemed to be in some way overcome. Either it was some new phase of feeling with her, or else she was taking the issue more seriously than she had yet done. She was generally more or less distrait, as though sunk in a brown study; from this she would recover herself with a start. This was usually when there occurred some marked episode in the journey, such as stopping at a station, or when the thunderous rumble of crossing a viaduct woke the echoes of the hills or cliffs around us. On each such occasion she would plunge into the conversation, taking such a part in it as to show that whatever had been her abstracted thought, her senses had taken in fully all that had gone on around her. Towards myself her manner was strange. Sometimes it was marked by a distance, half shy, half haughty, which was new to me. At other times there were moments of passion in look and gesture which almost made me dizzy with delight. Little, however, of a marked nature transpired during the journey. There was but one episode which had in it any element of alarm, but as we were all asleep at the time it did not disturb us. We only learned of it from a communicative guard in the morning. Whilst running between Dawlish and Teignmouth, the train was stopped by a warning given by someone who moved a torch to and fro right on the very track. The driver had found on pulling up that just ahead of the train a small landslip had taken place, some of the red earth from the high bank having fallen away. It did not, however, reach to the metals, and the driver had resumed his way, none too well pleased at the delay. To use his own words, the guard thought, "There was too much bally caution on this 'ere line." We arrived at Westerton about 9 o'clock in the evening. Carts and horses were in waiting, and the work of unloading the train began at once. Our own party did not wait to see the work done, as it was in the hands of competent people. We took the carriage which was in waiting, and through the darkness of the night sped on to Kyllion. We were all impressed by the house as it appeared in the bright moonlight. A great grey stone mansion of the Jacobean period, vast and spacious, standing high over the sea, on the very verge of a high cliff. When we had swept round the curve of the avenue cut through the rock, and come out on the high plateau on which the house stood, the crash and murmur of waves breaking against rock far below us came with an invigorating breath of moist sea air. We understood then in an instant how well we were shut out from the world on that rocky shelf above the sea. Within the house we found all ready. Mrs. Grant and her staff had worked well, and all was bright and fresh and clean. We took a brief survey of the chief rooms, and then separated to have a wash and to change our clothes, after our long journey of more than 24 hours. We had supper in the great dining room on the south side, the walls of which actually hung over the sea. The murmur came up muffled, but it never ceased. As the little promontory stood well out into the sea, the northern side of the house was open, and the due north was in no way shut out by the great mass of rock, which, reared high above us, shut out the rest of the world. Far off across the bay we could see the trembling lights of the castle, and here and there along the shore the faint light of a fisher's window. For the rest, the sea was a dark blue plain with an occasional flicker of light as the gleam of starlight fell on the slope of a swelling wave. When supper was over, we all adjourned to the room which Mr. Trelawny had set aside as his study, his bedroom being close to it. As we entered, the first thing I noticed was a great safe, somewhat similar to that which stood in his room in London. When we were in the room, Mr. Trelawny went over to the table, and, taking out his pocket-book, laid it on the table. As he did so, he pressed down on it with the palm of his hand. A strange pallor came over his face. With fingers that trembled, he opened the book, saying as he did so: "Its bulk does not seem the same. I hope nothing has happened." All three of us men crowded round close. Margaret alone remained calm; she stood erect and silent, and still as a statue. She had a far-away look in her eyes, as though she did not either know or care what was going on around her. With a despairing gesture Trelawny threw open the pouch of the pocket-book wherein he had placed the Jewel of 7 Stars. As he sank down in the chair which stood close to him, he said in a hoarse voice: "My God! It is gone! Without it, the great experiment can come to nothing." His words seemed to wake Margaret from her introspective mood. An agonized spasm swept her face, but almost on the instant she was calm. She almost smiled as she said: "You may have left it in your room, Father. Perhaps it has fallen out of the pocket-book whilst you were changing." Without a word we all hurried into the next room through the open door between the study and the bedroom. And then a sudden calm fell on us like a cloud of fear. There, on the table, lay the Jewel of 7 Stars, shining and sparkling with lurid light, as though each of the 7 points of each of the 7 stars gleamed through blood. Timidly we each looked behind us, and then at each other. Margaret was now